Hello and welcome to Keep Right On, a Birmingham City podcast brought to you from us here at Birmingham Live. I'm Brian Dick and I'm joined finally by the lesser spotted Alex Dicken, who has been away on his holidays, gallivanting across Europe and hopefully coming back feeling fully refreshed and full of vim and vigour. Alex, how are you doing?
Thank you very much, Brian, and back with a defeat. I really am the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've when I left you to Blues, they ended up getting relegated. Then they start the season well. You end up and they're out the Carabao Cup. Yes, indeed. More of which later. We're going to touch briefly on the last league game, which was obviously a 1-0 victory over Oxford United. Gary Rowett's Oxford United. We're going to dig deep into what happened on Tuesday evening, wasn't it? The Carabao Cup defeat to Port Vale, and towards the end of this episode, we will be joined by Leicestershire Live's Leicester City reporter Jordan Blackwell to look ahead to Friday night's game at the King Power Stadium. Alex, let's start with Oxford, and I'm not going to touch on it too long because it's kind of yesterday's news, but in a way, you know, it's also the last time we saw a Birmingham City first team. Overall, it was a pretty good performance. They should have won by much more. It came on the back of a really gutsy display at Blackburn, and it was their fourth unbeaten game at the start of the season. So overall, going into the Port Vale match, you were thinking, yeah, Blues are in a really good place here. They've made the step up really quite comfortably. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about, because he played a little bit on Tuesday night, was Kyogo. Now, Kyogo missed some really bad chances in the Oxford game. That said, his movement was excellent. And the reason the chances looked so bad when he missed them was because he was unmarked. He'd completely got separation from all the defenders. So, yeah, it was. He's made an interesting start to life at Blues. What have you made of Kyogo so far?
Yeah, there was always going to be eyes on Kyogo, weren't there, really, because he was the kind of marquee big money signing, or the player they paid the most money for in the summer so far, at least anyway. And he was very indifferent pre-season. We didn't see a great deal of him at Port Vale. He looked a little bit rusty against Nottingham Forest again. It didn't look like him and his teammates were on the same wavelength. And then we saw that Ipswich game where he surprisingly started and was fantastic. You know, his movement was superb that night. He hit the woodwork a couple of times, one of which led to the goal that Stansfield scored. Could have had a goal to himself that night. He was very good. So we were very encouraged by that. And then obviously since then it's been not as good. And I did, you were obviously there at the Oxford game, but I have seen kind of the highlights of it, and those two misses in particular, the one from the Grey Cross, the header, he should have scored, but mostly the one where he's been played through early on by Willemsen and he's kind of poked it wide. Probably just needs a goal in the Championship, doesn't he, to settle those kind of nerves if he has any at 30 years old, but to settle those nerves and get him up and running, because, like I said earlier, he is the big money signing or whatever, and the pressure is on him to deliver. I've liked what I've seen from him movement-wise and physically. I know he's not a big player, but he does make excellent runs. He's a pressing machine. I think he's a massive upgrade in terms of, if you look at the man he's replaced, Alfie May, in terms of physically, I think he's an upgrade in terms of his speed and pressing ability in behind. Finishing-wise, he has looked rusty. What I would say about him is you see some kind of really good players, good forwards, score a lot of goals, and they aren't always like fantastic strikers of a ball, are they? Like, I think of Raheem Sterling, who's had 20 goal seasons in the Premier League, but he's not an excellent striker of a ball. And I think Kyogo probably falls into that category. The connection doesn't always look clean. Like, I look at the finish that he produced from the Willemsen pass, and it was almost, you don't see many players or many forwards take that type of finish. Normally they'd go arrow it across the goalkeeper, whereas he's tried to kind of poke it inside. That's one thing I have noticed, and his touch hasn't always been on point, particularly against Port Vale. His touch wasn't brilliant when he came on. And if there was a fit Jay Stansfield, which we're going to come on to in a bit, and if there was a fit Marvin Dukes, then I'm not sure he'd be in your starting 11 at this point. I think he might be more of an impact sub.
Really interesting. I've, like you, my experience of Kyogo in pre-season was here's this new signing making loads of runs. Blues haven't got Scooby how to find him, or the players aren't quite on the same wavelength as him. What I would say that we've seen this season is he does feel more integrated into the team, and Damari Gray is finding him, and obviously Willem Willemsen found him against Oxford as well. So I think there are signs of progress. Listen, I think it might just be the case that his movement is going to get him a lot of chances, and he'll miss quite a few of them, and he'll end up with, let's say 12 goals or 14 goals or something like that this season, which I think, what's par, Alex, for a good season? Let's say, is that good enough?
I think the top scoring striker in the Championship last year was 20, wasn't it? But below that, I don't think there were any other strikers that got above 15. There are a couple of wingers that got between 15 and 20. But I think 15 is an excellent total for a Championship striker these days. I think anything above 12 is good. Kyogo can get to 12 goals. Stansfield can get to 12 goals, as he did a couple of years ago when Blues were in this league. Then, and a few of the others get to 8 to 10. Then you'd be kind of on track for that 70, 80, 90 goals that gets you in those kind of promotion pictures, doesn't it? So yeah, I think 12 goals would be an excellent return for Kyogo.
Yeah, you made reference to Jay Stansfield and the knock. Obviously, it was probably the biggest takeaway, wasn't it, from the Port Vale game? Is the fact in the dying minutes, Jay did sort of suffer a heavy tackle. What's the latest with that? Obviously, there's not much time between now and him being fit for the Leicester game. Yeah,
so Chris Davies would have been cursing the fact that he had to bring Stansfield on so early in that game. He probably wouldn't have wanted to give him such a chunk of it. Yeah, nasty challenge. When I say nasty challenge, and kind of fierce-looking block tackle between the pair of them, him and Vale left back Liam Gordon, right at the end of the game in stoppage time. And Stansfield obviously came off worse. He did kind of limp around for the final few minutes, but it was clear that he was in some discomfort. Chris Davies has admitted that he's got an issue that has put him at risk of playing against Leicester on Friday. Again, very cagey over these injuries. But as you said, the quick turnaround, given that he took a substantial knock against Port Vale, I mean, he's obviously a very, 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 very big doubt for the game against Leicester, isn't he? At the very, he's probably not going to be. If he can train today and give it a go, then he's obviously got a chance. But he wouldn't have had to do much yesterday anyway on Wednesday when the players would have been recovering. So, yeah, I think it's probably unlikely given the quick turnaround that he does play. Yeah. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. And then it comes down to how do Blues replace him, and can Blues replace him really in the play and the player that Stansfield is, given we've talked about Kyogo and the struggles that he's having. We can talk about Marvin Duction and Kanya Fujimoto are two other options at number 10, and they aren't fit yet or fully fit to start a Championship game. So you're probably looking at Keshi Anderson or Willem Willemsen in 10 position, probably the latter, I reckon, with Keshi going right.
Yeah, a few things to pick up on there. I think Blues starts the season 7 points from 9. Yes, the Leicester game, it feels like a statement game. It's on TV, and when the fixtures were announced, we were looking at this one and thought that will be the acid test of what League One, promoted League One side Birmingham City can achieve against relegated Premier League side Leicester City, and that's going to be a yardstick. But as I said, 7 points from 9. There's also the international break to come afterwards. You don't necessarily need to make Jay play or play through the pain barrier in this, do you? It might be an idea, if it is a bit of a concern, that you just shut him down for this game, give him the international break, and we go on from there. Yeah,
you can look at it that way, but you can also look at it, flip the coin and say, if it's a knock and it's an impact injury, which obviously it looks like it is, then is it going to get worse by him giving it a go? It's probably not, is it? And I think he's going to have 2 weeks to recover. Whether he's going to be able to put enough weight on it to run around for 90 minutes on Friday is a very different matter. He might not be able to. But these types of injuries, they're not muscular injuries, are they? So I feel like you're probably more inclined to take a chance, even though you have the international break.
Do you? Right. I'd be inclined to, if there's an iota of doubt, I'd be inclined to shut him down. But, we'll see which way Davies goes. I don't feel personally like Davies can be criticised for using Stansfield off the bench. Footballers play football, and in football games, footballers get injured. That's as deep as it is, right?
Yeah. It's I think you've left me nowhere to go there, Brian. But I agree.
Yeah.
He could have potentially brought on Kyogo, but fans wanted to win that game, didn't they? We saw by the reaction in the last 15 to 20 minutes of that game when Blues were knocking it around at the back with little purpose, and fans were calling for them to get the ball forward. They wanted to win the game. Naturally, Blues want to win a game. You put your best players on the field. So Jay Stansfield is one of them. So why wouldn't Chris Davies bring him on? I think it was logical at the time. It's backfired a little bit, but that's football. Yeah,
indeed. And we saw last season that Chris Davies does actually take all games, the cup competitions reasonably seriously, doesn't he? So, it's not that surprising. Let's move on to you've mentioned Marvin Duksch, who made his debut. What did you make of him?
He did more wrong than right in terms of his passing and possession play. But I think before he even completed a pass, he'd given the ball away 3 times. However, I'm not sure that's mathematically correct, because wasn't his pass completion 60%? Therefore, he did more right than wrong. Well, I suppose we could say that. Fair enough. Oh, you've done me there, haven't you? But what I'm trying to say is that I was very impressed with the ideas that he had. He was always looking to do something out of the ordinary. He wasn't always trying to play safe passes. Played a lot of first-time passes. His link play, you could see what he was trying to do. There are a couple of really, really inventive ideas that he came up with. One was a left-footed lob pass over the top first time to Lewis Koumas to set him away. And one was another ball to Koumas, a first-time pass after he'd linked with Lyndon Dykes that probably Koumas could have got under his spell a little bit better and done more with, I think. That led to a corner, I think, in the end. So there were those bits and some link play. First-time touches, I really liked. The execution was off. I think that was obvious to everyone who watched him that he was giving the ball away a fair bit, as you mentioned, with the pass completion rate. So that's rustiness. He's not had a pre-season. Chris Davies pointed out afterwards that, if we all knew the ins and outs, we'd think it was amazing that he'd actually got on the field and played 45 minutes. So he's obviously had a very disrupted pre-season, has barely trained since joining Blues properly anyway. So I think that was probably about as good as we could have expected, and that Chris Davies wanted to use that game to give him those minutes to get him up to speed faster, because he's not got pre-season games to do that in now. So I was encouraged. You can see there's a good player in there.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, he's played for Germany. Ins and outs is not something you get with Chris Davies when it comes to injury stories, is it? So, no, we might have to be left to ponder those. You also mentioned Lewis Koumas. Obviously, he joined on loan from Liverpool. His first appearance against Port Vale as well. Some encouraging signs, fair to say?
Yeah, if there was a bright spark on the night, it would have been Koumas. He had the two best chances, but they weren't really chances. The one where I mentioned Duksch played him through and he just couldn't quite get it under his spell, and the one where Lyndon Dykes flicked it around the corner, he just dropped his shot wide. But he was the best Blues player on the night, outfield player at least. Beadle made a couple of good saves, so could probably give him a run for his money for man of the match if we're handing one out. But I was quite impressed with Koumas. I'm not sure. He clearly prefers to play on the left wing, and as we know, Damari Gray's pretty much already nailed that down. I'm not sure he's going to be a starter, but again, we've mentioned previously over the summer, Damari Gray's injury record over the last couple of years in Saudi Arabia hasn't been perfect. So, you wouldn't imagine he's getting through 46 games in a season. So, they're going to need another option. Lewis Koumas looks like a very good player.
Yeah, Damari's actually played a little bit of right, hasn't he, and a little bit of left so far this season. He was brilliant against Oxford. Damari was absolutely outstanding, and there's Keshi Anderson as well. So, I mean, Anderson can play both sides as well, can't he? So, if Koumas does see himself primarily as a left winger, then I think there's facility to sort of let him be that. And obviously, we know from last season, we've already seen a little bit this season. Where Blues' width comes from. It can be the fullback on either side as much as it can be, an out-and-out winger, can't it?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Koumas could play both. I think he's probably more suited to the left. Yeah. Gray, as you said, played right against Blackburn as well as Ipswich, and played left against Oxford. So yeah, and we'll come on to Kanya Fujimoto now. He's probably probably a 10, but can play off the right when he's got that right back marauding beyond him. So. He didn't really get involved against Port Vale as much. He was definitely the quietest of the 3 debutants that night. People have made comparisons with Miyoshi, but I'm not sure there's anything there other than that he's a left-footed player drifting in from the right. I think he's quite different to Miyoshi. I think he's probably someone I think will have more joy in central areas, whereas Miyoshi did tend to do better out wide and turning into cross. So I wasn't sure about Fujimoto, to be honest. I think we'll obviously see more of him in the coming weeks. But yeah, again, a player who's had a very disrupted pre-season with an injury and barely kicked a ball since joining Blues. So he's probably going to need a month or two before we see the best of him.
Yeah, indeed. All I would say on Fujimoto is, of all the signings, there seems to be quite a lot of excitement about the fact they've got him. But, excitement doesn't necessarily produce results. I remember, Jeremy Boga being an absolute a star in Blues training when he first signed, going back, I think it was under Steve Cottrell, and Blues just didn't get enough out of him. So yeah, we'll see what becomes of Fujimoto. The other sort of slightly concerning thing from the Port Vale game was the defensive wobbles, wasn't it? They looked really uncomfortable with Port Vale's approach.
Yeah, I found the highlights package that Blues put together of the game quite amusing and a fair reflection of what it was, really. I mean, they put their Kumas chance where he dragged it wide, and that was about it from their attacking point of view, and the rest of it was that 15 minutes at the end of the first half where Port Vale had 5 or 6 corners in quick succession, and every single one could have led to a goal. Mo Farr had 2 headers that James Beale did very well to save, pretty much free headers as well. Crossdale had one under the crossbar that he should have scored, and then he turned provider for Headley to score the goal on a second phase of a corner. So a set piece concerned me when Christophe Clara is not there. Blues have conceded 2 goals via that route this season, having a second phase of a corner, because the one against Blackburn was one they failed to clear, and Campbell's ended up volleying home. So that was it wasn't an issue last season, but it was an area where they just didn't match up very well to their rivals, did they? They weren't brilliant in terms of particularly attacking set piece. They didn't score that many goals compared to the teams in League One. And they'd probably be quite middle of the road in the Championship, and they obviously conceded 2 goals from set piece this season. For a team that does look very well-oiled, that's probably an area where other teams are looking at and thinking, okay, maybe we could have some joy there, because they often aren't the biggest. There's the 2 centre-backs, which on Friday will probably be Clara and Neumann. And he ends up often playing Willemsen purely for that kind of third big body on set pieces. So, that's an area that I still think needs a little bit of work. Yeah,
obviously Clara looked like a massive miss, didn't he, on Tuesday. Of the pair this season, Neumann and Clara, you think, oh, wow, Neumann has probably been the most eye-catching. But when Clara's not there, you really miss him. And it was whatever the writer's equivalent of the commentator's curses, did an interview with Neumann at the weekend and put it out on the Tuesday morning of the Port Vale game, saying that, how well he's playing. And then, he probably had a bit of a wobble against Port Vale. Would you agree, or is that being overly critical?
No, I think it's fair, Brian. I mean, he was probably one of the players caught out of position for Headley sneaking in behind to score the goal that settled it. On the ball, he looked as poor as I've seen him. I've been quite impressed with Phil Norman on the ball, but he was often the player that Port Vale let have possession, let move forward, especially later in the game. And there are a couple of decisions where he's ended up giving the ball away in fairly basic circumstances, and he could have kept the ball late on that frustrated fans clearly. And I just don't think that partnership between him and Aaron Cashin had the balance that either of them have when they're playing next to Christophe Clara.
Yeah, indeed. Right, let's move on. We're going to make ourselves slight hostage to fortune now, because with, 4 days before the transfer window shut, we're just going to do a quick transfer update on what we think might happen and what we're hearing. Obviously, that could change the minute we start recording this. But at the moment, Alex, as we record this on Thursday, about 11 o'clock, we're still expecting quite a bit of business, a little bit in and a few out, aren't we, I think, before September the 1st.
Blues always tend to surprise us with one signing right at the end. I mean, when have Blues not made a signing at 11:15 or whatever? Or this time it'll be 7:15 when the lights go out, they'll end up announcing someone 15 minutes later. So the idea is to strengthen defensively, isn't it? That they are short on bodies defensively, so they could do with another centre back. And Chris Davies talked all summer about a left back. It seems it's a difficult position for them to sign someone because Alex Cochrane knows the position so well, and anyone coming in is probably going to have to bide their time, and that's not a situation that anyone really wants, because players who are moving at this time of window tend to want to play football straight away, don't they? Because they've not been getting that elsewhere. So that's dead. Those two are the positions definitely to watch. Whether there's any movement elsewhere to force them to sign another player, I'm not too sure. With regards outgoings, we're looking at the players who aren't going to play much, aren't we? So speaking to Chris Davies yesterday about George Hall and Alfie Chang, two talented youngsters who've come through the system and played championship football before. He said they clearly aren't going to get that here, so he hopes they can find moves before Monday's deadline to play elsewhere. They both obviously were on loan at Walsall last season after injury issues, so both are up to speed now physically and can move. So you'd expect those two to move. With a year left in their contracts, it probably feels like it's time to move permanently as well, rather than loans. Beyond that, I think we've been looking at Mark Leonard all summer, but I spoke to him after the game on Tuesday when he captained the side against Port Vale, and he suggested that he's now happy to stay put and he wants to stay at the club. And as he's gone through the summer, his conversations with Chris Davies got better and better, and he now kind of sees how he's going to feature and what have you. So it sounds like Mark Leonard's going to stay, so that leaves Blues quite well stocked in midfield. The player I'm looking at from my own kind of, completely randomly now, the player I'm looking at, I think maybe he could move on in search of first team football is Taylor Gardner-Hickman. I think he's been left in a little bit of a sticky situation there because a lot of his football for Blues has come at right back, and they've now got Bright Samuel and Ethan Laird. So you're relying on for Gardner-Hickman to get a chance, either both getting injured or Asai Samuel going to AFCON with Nigeria, which is at Christmas, and then Laird getting injured at that time, or obviously because of the hectic schedule, Gardner-Hickman and Laird rotating. In midfield, I don't really see a route in if you've got Pekka Nawata, Leonard behind them, and also Tommy Doyle, who can play those positions as well, or Will has played most of his career in those positions. He's obviously so versatile that he can also play in the wide positions. But Blues have got a load of options in those wide positions now. We mentioned Kumas, we've got Damari Gray, we've got Keshi Anderson, Willemsen tends to play off the right. So I just see it being very difficult for Gardner-Hickman to get minutes. And it comes down to whether he wants to stick around and trust his versatility will get him minutes, or whether he thinks, okay, I've played 40-odd games last season, I want to have a similar season where I go and play a lot of football at 23 years old. So that's probably one where I'd say I think it's maybe one to watch.
Yeah, indeed. Just checking here, Gardner-Hickman's versatility, it gets him onto the bench, I think I'm going to say, in every championship match so far this season.
Yeah.
He's been on the bench in every championship match this season. And on the pitch once, I think, in championship games. So he's going to be in the squads, but, as you say, whether that's good enough. And you just feel the versatility that gets him on the bench counts against him when it comes to getting him on the pitch, which is really unfortunate because I thought he conducted himself really well last season, and I thought, he was really quite underrated. If only by me. I was really pleasantly surprised with how technical he was and his ability on the ball and how he would impact games last season. He's a championship footballer for me, but is he a championship footballer in this team? And not at the moment. He isn't. And as you say, it'll be as much his decision as to what he wants to do, and then there'll be the question of, do other clubs come in for him? And Blues think, well, actually that's a decent offer. I think there might be two or three others that, if clubs want to come in and make an offer for someone like Thor or, someone like that, then potentially the club do look at it, mate. But then obviously what you've then got to do is you've got to have your succession plan rolled out really quickly, haven't you? If
you said to me, and a lot of people might not agree with me, but if you said to me, Thor leaves, Thor, why am I joining you in calling him Thor? Willemsen leaves and Kieran Dowell comes in, then I'd be quite comfortable with that swap because Kieran Dowell's played a lot of football championship before. I think Kieran Dowell's body of work in League One compared to Willemsen's was better. So I'd be quite comfortable with that switch. Chris Davis played Willemsen for 90 minutes against Oxford. I know it's at Oxford at home. It's not the biggest championship game of the season, but I think there are going to be games for a player like Willemsen, where you need kind of those cute passes. You can have a right winger who is basically a number 10 who just plays inside all game and doesn't have to track back a lot. I think there is room for Willemsen in games like that where Blues are going to completely dominate the ball at home. Do I think there is room to play Willemsen away at Leicester City on the right wing? No. And I think that's probably going to be the case in most championship games away from St Andrews. But I think you can carry a player like that knowing that you don't have to play him all the time. But again, it's like, is he going to be happy with that role? Maybe. He would have played 30 games a season in Holland before joining Blues. So will he be happy with 30 games in England? Probably. I think there's room for a player like that. Samsted, I think, has probably played his last game for Blues now. Yeah. And obviously Tyler Roberts, who I'd pretty much forgotten about earlier this week when I was kind of thinking of players that would leave the club, but because he's not been involved in the first team for so long, but he's obviously going to move on as well.
Yeah, indeed. The one name that's been linked with Blues, and I can't even get close to standing under this up. That said, I haven't made any direct phone calls about this one for the last 3 or 4 days. Is that Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain? The last time I looked into this, which was when you were away last week, I was told no. Since then he's had his contract cancelled by Besiktas. Talk to me. What are your thoughts about Oxlade-Chamberlain? Doesn't feel like it passes the smell test to me. But you go on.
No, it didn't. But then Blues have signed a lot of 30-somethings, those experienced players this summer, and now I'm beginning to think, maybe it does. But no, it doesn't really. And he'd feel like if Blues, I mentioned Gardner Hickman, if Gardner Hickman left, Oxlade-Chamberlain would feel like, a sort of upgrade on him, wouldn't he? He's kind of a similar player in that, maybe not in style, but in terms of his versatility. He can play central midfield, he can play right wing, he can play left wing, he can play at right back if you really need him to. So maybe Blues need a player like that in their squad, and obviously if Gardner Hickman did leave, but I just don't see that one. I think you're bringing someone like that in to play every week, aren't you? Because he's going to command that level of salary, and I don't think Blues are looking for guaranteed starters at this point. I think they're looking for squad players, and I don't think Oxlade-Chamberlain would fall into that category. So
Oxlade-Chamberlain made 20 appearances last season. 13 of them came either in defensive midfield or central midfield, and the other position he mainly played was left wing. And you're absolutely right. You don't make a signing of Oxlade-Chamberlain's profile and then have him as a squad player. Have we given ourselves enough rope to be embarrassed in like a day's time or on transfer deadlines? I think we probably have, haven't we? We're now joined by Leicestershire Live's Leicester City reporter, Jordan Blackwell. Jordan, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks, Brian. How are you?
Yeah, we're all good, thank you. I understand you've got a press conference later today, so we won't keep you too long. I know there's plenty of stuff to talk about in Leicester City's start to life in the Championship and the rest of the season ahead. So just give us a sort of a potted summary of how Leicester have done so far this season.
Not brilliantly, I think would be fair to say, even though they're sitting on 6 points. It feels like a reasonable return, but I think performance-wise, it's not been quite to the level that many would have hoped. I think first game of the season against Sheffield Wednesday, they obviously expected to win that fairly handsomely, and they sort of needed a late goal, although I do think they played pretty well second half. Then they lost away at Preston, looked very susceptible to counter-attacks in that game, and sort of deservedly lost. And then last weekend at Charlton, I thought they were second best and probably should have lost the game, but thanks to a moment of magic from Fatawu and some decent keeping, they managed to claim the 3 points. So performance-wise, it's not been the best. I think off the pitch, there's obviously been lots going on as well. And also not very much going on in terms of they've made one signing, a 38-year-old goalkeeper. So it's been a difficult summer, I would say, in terms of adjusting to the Championship, and I think it'll probably be a few more weeks yet before Cifuentes really feels settled into the job, and everything around the club feels a little bit more settled, I would say.
You've mentioned Cifuentes there, Jordan. The last time Birmingham City fans will have set eyes on a Leicester City team in the flesh, obviously Enzo Maresca was the manager, and it was a very sort of patient build-up, possession-heavy team. How similar or different is what Maresca's version did to what Cifuentes wants from his team now?
I would say, from what we've seen so far, I would say Maresca was more stubborn, in that there was a very particular style of play, and that was the way to play. And if it wasn't going very well, the idea was just to do it quicker or do it better. I think Cifuentes feels, although the idea is similar in the sense of wanting to keep the ball, I think they've had the biggest share of possession in the Championship so far this season. There is a greater willing to change things during the game, to change things game by game, and I think there's it's not quite as rigid in terms of how the players play. So in the first game, we saw both of the fullbacks sort of moving into sort of number 10 positions on the edge of the box, and the sort of midfielders rotating out and coming to the wings. Also at the half time in that game, he'd been playing Oliver Skipp as a kind of a box-to-box midfielder, but then he brought on Harry Winks in place, and he played as a more sitting midfielder, and it changed how the sort of the dynamics of the team. So there's little things like that where you think Cifuentes is more willing to change things, but I think the broad idea of keeping the ball, dominating possession, is still a big factor, and playing out from the back. I think we saw a lot in pre-season that Leicester were a lot more aggressive in how they pressed compared to under Maresca, but I think we've not really seen it since the competitive season started. So possibly because the way the teams have set up against Leicester, that's not really been, they've not been able to play that way. But those are the differences. I do think it is different. I think that also the quality of the players is slightly not quite as good as under Maresca, particularly in midfield, I would say.
Alex?
Jordan, I remember 2 years ago, the Leicester team, obviously they had the excellent midfield that you just alluded to, but they also had two very good wide players in Fatawa and Mavididi, who are obviously still there. Mavididi didn't play as much last season. He caused Blues a lot of issues that season. I think he scored 3 times against them. And Fatawa coming back off a very long-term injury that saw him miss most of last season. Are they still the key threats for Leicester? And is Mavididi going to be fit for this game?
I think the suggestions from Cifuentes last weekend were that he hoped Mavididi would be fit. It seemed like he thought this game was more important than the Charlton game, and it was almost like, well, I'm not going to play him against Charlton and risk him being injured for this one. So I think Mavididi will come back in. Yes, they are still the most important players in terms of attacking threats, particularly with the sort of saga around El Khanous at the minute and whether he's going to stay or go. But they are, for the Championship, they are elite level wingers. I think they're both good enough to play in the Premier League. Really, I think maybe not for a very top club, but certainly to be in that division. They saw at the weekend at Charlton with Fatawu that even in games where Leicester don't play well, they can give him the ball and he can cut in on his left foot and stick one in the top corner from 20 yards. And there aren't many players in the division that can do that as regularly as Fatawu does it. I think that's probably been the biggest positive of the season, that Fatawu was out for 8 months with an ACL injury, which, in fairness, is not all that long for an ACL injury, but he's come back and he's showed absolutely no signs of it affecting him whatsoever. He's still got the pace, he's still got the skill and the confidence. So yes, I would say those are the two big threats. I think particularly while there's no sort of big name striker like Vardy, particularly with everything going on around El Khanous, so I don't think he will play this weekend. So Fatawu and Mavididi will be the ones to watch.
Any weaknesses that we should be looking to exploit?
Quite a few, I would say. I think they've looked very susceptible. Yeah, they've looked very susceptible to counterattacks down the flanks. because of the way the fullbacks have come in field, they do tend to leave gaps, down the sides, and particularly down the left side, because Vestergaard has played sort of left centre back, and as good as he is on the ball, he's not suited to running back. He's not going to win many races against strikers. I think probably the issue that a couple of issues that sort of came to light at Charlton were sort of the weaknesses from set pieces. I think Charlton had a lot of chances from long throws and corners in the second half, and Leicester were fortunate not to concede from one of them. And then I think the really big difference between the quality of the squad in this team and Maresca's team is the midfield. I think when you had Winks at the base of the midfield with Ricardo Pereira coming in to play next to him, and then Dewsbury Hall and Ndidi ahead, that was an extremely strong midfield for the Championship, and they could dominate games but also protect the defence. This season it's mostly been Skip and Soumaré, and I do think they're easier to get through as a midfield. So I think, whether Birmingham want to go down the wings or through the middle, I think they will be able to find joy, either way. So it's a good time to play Leicester, because I think there are, I think they're still sort of finding their feet in those terms. So I think there'll be there's a few ways to get at them.
Jordan, obviously a lot of the focus, particularly from a media perspective, is going to be on Demarai Gray going back to Leicester, where he obviously won the Premier League 9 years ago. What kind of reception will he get, and how is he remembered at Leicester? And also, what kind of impact do you think he can have on the game? Because he has started the season quite well for Blues.
I think he will get a polite applause. I think that's probably the best guess. I think the players that have left Leicester, and they've tended not to be so good receptions of those that have kind of gone on to what feels like bigger clubs, the players that have gone to Chelsea or Manchester United or wherever. I think the feeling with Demarai Gray was that his time at Leicester had kind of naturally come to an end, and that at the time that he left, it made sense for both him and for the club. I think the sort of overriding memories were that he was a little bit frustrating, I think. I think he obviously he was very young when he came to Leicester, and I think there was a level of inconsistency there. Yeah, those are the memories. I think, as I said before about the opportunities to play down the wing, I think that probably will help him. And I think if Birmingham can get him on the ball in space, there will be kind of space ahead of him, if you like, for him to run into. But yeah, I think it will be a reasonable reception. I don't think anybody holds any ill will towards Gray. I think it was just a case that most of the time he was at Leicester, there were better wingers ahead of him, and so he was always coming on as a sub or always playing in cup games. And he never quite managed to turn that into a player that you could rely on to start week in, week out and deliver. So yeah, I think that's where he stands. I think I would hope that he gets a reasonable reception.
Jordan, I suppose the £6 million or £20 million question or 9 point question or however you want to deal with this is, what do you think City's promotion prospects are this season? And I make reference to the money and the points, because obviously it is all wrapped up with PSR and finance and potential breaches and points deductions. What are people expecting?
I think internally and also within the fan base, I think the expectation is that they should still compete for promotion. But I think there is an acceptance that they could get a points deduction, and that could end up with them in the playoffs. I think if they finished outside the playoffs, even receiving a points deduction, I think that would be treated as a sort of a poor season. Obviously, we're still waiting to hear what the verdict will be. I think it feels like there will be a points deduction. I know that Leicester came through a case before where they, some would say they found a loophole. Some would say they just checked the Premier League's own rules better than the Premier League did, and they got away with it. I think the sense is that this time they won't, but I think the sort of deciding factor at the moment is that there's these 2 extra charges. So there were 3 charges. The first is for the sort of standard, you went over the loss threshold allowed within PSR, but then there are 2 more that are one for filing accounts late and another one for not being cooperative, in short. And they've not really been they've not really come to the fore in any of the previous cases, either with Forest or Everton or anything like that. And so it's not really known what the punishment for those might be. So yeah, they're kind of in this, sort of purgatory where they really don't know what the punishment will be. It could be, 6 points. I think there's been suggestions it could be as many as 12. So, if it is that severe, I think they would really struggle to certainly finish in the top 2. But I do think that with the quality that they do still have in the squad, that a position, I think the hope would be that they at least finish in the top 6.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jordan. Sounds like a half decent time to be playing Leicester. Thank you, Brian, again, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back before the deadline, around transfer deadline, to discuss that next week. But hopefully Blues can be celebrating the 3 points again this weekend. A big keep right on, and thank you for listening.